Hi, everybody. This evening, we welcome our very own Krysten Manke.
Got
Got it, nailed it, as our moderator. When she's not here, she is a teacher. She earned a PhD in rhetoric and composition and has taught many kinds of writing and literature. Her knowledge and love of literature makes her an excellent moderator. So we welcome her tonight. I'm looking forward to this. Our author this evening, our main attraction, is author Rosen, an accomplished author of a staff favorite, Lavender House, which was a BuzzFeed Library Journal and Amazon Bestbook of the Year. Tonight, he brings us Lion's Legacy, a young adult novel that weaves together adventure, romance, and magic in a celebration of the power of claiming your queer identity. So welcome, and we're very excited to have you.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm very excited to be back.
I know we manifested this moment.
Yeah, we really have.
I think before we get into it, we should first recognize our incredibly attractive audience.
Yes,
And I just like
absolutely.
a series of really good looking people. So they're on YouTube, you can't see it, but A+. So Lion's Legacy is a coming of age story.
Mhm.
It's a story about sort of finding who you are and what you want in a time that's rapidly changing. For Tennessee, Russo, our protagonist in the story, there's a lot going on, more than perhaps your typical existential adolescent ennui. What can you tell us about this book?
Yeah, so Lion's Legacy is sort of a variation on another state-named archaeological adventurer. In that it's about Tennessee Russo, who when he's the son of a famous archaeologist, sort of treasure hunter, who has a reality show that he films himself. And when Tennessee is young, he joins his father on the show, and for a few seasons they find various artifacts together. But then when he's 15, Tennessee sort of realizes that these artifacts aren't necessarily being returned to the cultures that they belong to, but rather sold by his father to the highest bidder, and they have a big falling out. His father abandons him in Japan to find his own way home at 15, and they essentially don't really speak for 2 years. But Tennessee is queer. He came out on the show to his father, and his father absolutely accepted it. But 2 years later, that is important because 2 years later, Tennessee has just gone through a very bad day, let's say, and suddenly his father reappears and is like, "Hey, look, I have a lead on the wedding rings of the Sacred Band of Thebes, which was a queer army in ancient Greek, composed of 150 gay couples. And I know that you always wanted to find those. And I want you to come back to the show. I want you to look for them with me. And if we find them, you get to decide what's done with them, like as a way of admitting maybe I was a little wrong in our argument." And with very little left to lose in his mind, Tennessee agrees, because this is about, for him, proving to the world via the show and the history that queer people have always existed and that they have a long and powerful legacy. And so they go searching for these rings, and along the way, puzzles, temples, etc.
Very exciting things. When we talk about the Sacred Ring, the Sacred Band of Thebes, and all of the history that was involved in this. I asked you this question last time too. Tell me about the research and how much you did, and maybe give us a couple of nuggets of what were some of your favorite things that you found? Because one of the themes in this is how much erasure there's kind of been of queer history throughout time, and the fact that so many historians don't even necessarily want to admit that this band of 150 men maybe an item. So tell me more about the research that you did.
Yeah, well, there was one key book that I used for it, but and it's in the back. I'm not going to remember the name of it. It's like called essentially the Sacred Band of Thebes. The author's name is escaping me at the moment. I apologize. But it is acknowledged in the very back of the book. And it's different to do the research for something like this than it is for Lavender House. And part of that is like with this, because there is sort of a magical element, I knew I had to create my own history. So while the Sacred Band of Thebes is real, is historical, was 300 gay men fighting and like one of the most powerful armies for decades, the rings are completely made up. And I explain all this in the author's note in the back. And so that's sort of my rule was like the history has to be real, but the relic can be fake. But because it's more about a contemporary teen investigating that history, I can sort of choose his focus. And because of that, I can leave things out. There's so much history that I just was like, all right, this is getting really complicated. Like there's this whole thing where these men essentially infiltrate a city dressed in drag, and that's sort of how they form the band. Anyway, but so
That's
there's
a whole side story.
yeah, no, like
Prequel.
I mean, read the actual history book by a man who is much smarter than me, and that'll give you the real history, as opposed to like Lavender House, where I'm writing someone living in it. So it's not about something where I can really choose my focus as much, because every detail has to be as accurate as possible. So for that, I have to do much more comprehensive research, not just on like, queer history or like this one area, this one group or whatever, but rather on like everything from the music to the culture to the, everything. And I have to immerse myself. Whereas this, I get to maintain a distance, and that makes it a lot easier. Honestly.
The more you get to make up, the easier it
Yeah,
becomes.
I know. It's funny how that works out.
So that brings me to a question that I have about, you're talking about Lavender House, Lion's Legacy, the differences in researching the two. What else changes for you in the process of switching back and forth? Because you have 3 books coming out this year, 2 are young adults and 1 is adult fiction. What changes for you in the writing process between the two? What considerations are you taking differently?
Between adult and young adult? I think the big difference is that when you're writing for teenagers, there's this closeness that we don't necessarily have as adults. And I don't want to say that adults can't get really into the book or love a book or like feel super connected to the book. Obviously, we can. But with teenagers, there is less almost ironic distance from a book. There's like a level of sincerity that even the most jaded seeming teenager, I think, has, in that characters feel like people to them. And so as an adult, we read books, and if a character, like to take an example of like a big twist that I hope everyone knows by now, in Gone Girl, having a twist like that, as an adult, we get to be like, oh, that's an exciting twist. Teenagers, depending on how you do that sort of a twist, because they can enjoy a twist, but depending on how you do it, it can feel like a big betrayal, and it can feel very false to them. And so because of that, you have to be a little more careful with the sort of artistry. And I think the thing that teens respond to most, although it's weird to group them all like that, but the thing that I always go for when I'm writing YA is sort of voiciness, and that like idea of the protagonist as a real human being, like flesh and blood. And that's the thing that drives my YA writing a little more than my adult writing, I think.
Which is so interesting too, because there's a lot to kind of unpack in terms of Tennessee's experiences in adolescence and the things that he's kind of grappling with, and some of them have to do with, he's got not a unique experience, but a somewhat less common in the dominant narrative experience of having 2 parents just accept him right when he comes out. He doesn't really have to overcome that hurdle. But one of the things that you do sort of portray for him in this story is kind of the idea of found families. Like he's very much on this search for his queer community, and like the people who kind of like, you have that little secret handshake, that little nod on the sidewalk. Can you speak to that, and also maybe other things that you want, because they are so close to the characters? What else do you want kids to get out of this?
I think that, the opening scenes, 10 like is walking through New York and just sort of like clicking with the queer community. He just, people he doesn't know, but he recognizes as queer. He sees them, he's like, oh, that's my people, they share a glance, whatever. And that to me is a really exciting thing to write, because I think it shows someone who feels sort of at home within the community. And, you know, this book very much is about the power of that community. But I think that also when he gets to school and we see him with his friends who like feel that there's an appropriate way to behave as queer people, we see that like that ideal and his actual reality are sort of further away than he wants them to be, even if he doesn't necessarily realize it. And so I think what I want teenagers to take out of that is that, you know, just because, you know, the people you're with, the queer people you're with, the queer community you find in your school doesn't necessarily represent the greater queer community, because we are obviously a community of communities, but also the idea of the perfect gay like family is something that's going to vary person to person, and you shouldn't force yourself into the one that seems most welcoming or kindest to you immediately.
Yeah. And you have these two groups of, it's almost like Mean Girls for those who remember it, right? You have the sort of scene where there's all the cafeteria and they're sort of laying out here the social spheres, right? And in this particular table, you have sort of the nice upstanding queers, and then you have the sort of alt queers, which sort of throughout this, and like the upstanding queers are kind of functioning in a way that I saw, and we talked about this briefly over email, but there was this fascinating metaphor I saw for the way that you were introducing magic into this, because they're going on these adventures, they're pulling these artifacts. There is a name redacted due to legal reasons connection to sort of going on an archaeological adventure with a hat and a whip, where they encounter things that are maybe supernatural, or they encounter things that are a little bit magic, and in the course of their documenting this and putting out the show that they create together, they don't really reveal the most of the magic that they see. They'll sort of pan to like a shadow of something happening, or they'll insinuate that something happens, and kind of the debate about it is one of the things that keeps the show alive. And to me, that was such a powerful metaphor of the queer experience, and sort of that a constant dance that you're doing of how much one should be revealing about oneself in a particular situation, how much is comfortable for the public in any particular scenario. And I wondered if that
when you said that in an email, I was like, wow, you're making me sound really smart. That was not something I really thought about, especially because originally, like the first draft of this, it was all out there, and like it was just like, yep, there's magic in the world. Here are like 5 artifacts, and like here's how they're taken care of, and everyone knows. And there was some feedback from multiple editors when we sent it out, and they were like, the world building in that regard feels a little odd, because wouldn't that change a lot more of the world? Would this happen? Would this? And I was like, that's a good point, let's make it more secret. So that was more but it's a great metaphor, and I'm going to say from now on, yeah,
you absolutely. Do you think Shakespeare was like this, right? Like he was just kind of writing plays to like stuck up to Queen Elizabeth. He wasn't really like, oh, and then the beautiful like the father-daughter relationship and this metaphor, like
yeah, no, I don't think he was doing any of that.
He probably would come back now.
I think he was drunk a lot. I'm gonna get angry emails.
Right, drunk, edit, sober sitters anyway, so it's a theme. So in one of the other things that I really appreciated about this book in terms of coming of age, being a Bildungsroman, if I can use the term, and you can't stop me, is as you were sort of saying before, the relationship with the dad is complicated. And I think it's very interesting the way that you present it in a way where he's not a one-dimensional character. He's not just like a cardboard cutout in the shape of a parental unit. He is in fact kind of a complex, flawed, yet potentially redeemable individual. And I thought you did a very good job of portraying the relationship of that moment that adolescents always reach, where you sort of have that shift from realizing, oh, my parents aren't omniscient, they can't protect me from everything, they don't actually know everything, I feel betrayed. Oh, they're actually like a flawed individual. It's that sort of like that disillusionment or that realization.
Yeah,
that was super interesting.
I'm trying to remember this Oscar Wilde quote. That's something like, as we
Shout out to
grow.
Mama Rosen.
As
Saying
we
present company except.
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely. And there's a wild quote that's something like, as we grow up, we sort of realize our parents are human, and then sometimes we choose to forgive them for it. And that is absolutely like sort of what I was trying, and I think in a lot of YA, if you have a parent drama of any sort, that tends to be at the heart of it, like realizing your parents are human beings. And in this case, Ten realizes maybe his dad isn't even the best human being. And the act of trying to sort of make your parent into a better person, I think is one that a lot of teenagers today are dealing with. So it felt like something that would be important to express to me. And it's the dad, Henry, I love writing him. Like, he is just so much. I mean, obviously there is some inspiration to take from him. He's big on putting stuff in museums, and he wears a brown fedora. But I really wanted to, or I really had fun with being able to sort of have him be this guy who like has a distinct moral point of view that is not one I agree with, but like he can argue it really well. And I got a lot of that from talking to a real life archeologist. I was very lucky to be able to do that. And she was like, there are people who, there are two schools of thought within archaeology, and some people are very much, as you say, we'll return these things to their native cultures, that's where they belong, take everything out of the British Museum and put them back. And I was like, there are people against that, and she's like, absolutely, because it has to do with preservation and display, and like, you return these things to certain countries. We don't know what those countries are going to do with that history. Some countries actively try to erase history all the time. When I responded to that, because obviously I've seen queer history erased all the time. So I understood that perspective, and I put it into him like after this conversation, and it made him really interesting and human. Obviously I made him also deeply flawed, and he's extraordinarily proud. He doesn't know how to apologize. But that was, that mentality has a certain logic behind it. It's just that you need to unpack that logic and like look for ways to preserve, and essentially that's what Ten does. And in defense of the complexities of the real life archaeology, I will say that the solution that Ten comes up with at the end is one that is fictional. Like, I had to essentially create some stuff to make it all work out. So it is a really complicated thing, even if we all do want these artifacts to be returned to the people they belong to, and I do strongly believe that. We also have to look at who are the people that they belong to, and if you like return it to a country, will those people be able to actually keep control of that history, or will it be taken from them?
Absolutely. And you did a really good job of making a character who abandons his son in a foreign country and then doesn't speak to him for 2 years.
Yeah, no,
Be redeemable at the end.
that's the thing where it's like, oh boy.
Oh, how's he gonna come back from this
Yeah,
one?
I definitely had one reader who was like, there's no way anyone could ever come back from that. And I was like, it's probably true for a lot of people, but I'm gonna do my best.
No, I mean, it's the way that it comes together. It's so he kind of dangles a carrot that's like,
Yeah,
you can't refuse it. And then it's really sort of once he's back in that atmosphere that he's like, oh, I'm just a prisoner.
yeah. No, and like they have
Sorry,
so
swear
much
in front
fun.
of you.
Oh no, the books will hear.
The books will
But the thing about them is they just have so much fun together.
They
Like,
do.
that's what it is. And I think that is very true of a lot of relationships, parental, sibling, friends, whatever. You can have so much fun with someone and then sort of hate them when they're not in the room.
Sure. So there are a lot of really fun relationships in this book, and I think that Tennessee makes just some really fun friendships, romances, relationships. It's kind of a gray area that I don't necessarily think that any of the characters in the book are particularly committed to sorting out, like they seem like they're just having fun, and they're all like, there's like a love triangle, but it's not a love triangle because everybody's just kind of like, send me cute pics. So that's like, these characters feel like they were really fun to write, and in particular, like Tennessee kind of getting to have fun, like seemed like it was.
When I told my agent about it, and she was like, "You're doing a lot of genre stuff here," and I was like, "Yeah, it's sort of Indiana Jones meets Eat, Pray, Love," which is like such a weird combination. But yeah, there is that sort of aspect of after a bad breakup, going to a foreign country and like finding a cute fella, and that was fun to write. And it's interesting because like I didn't think of that as being that big a component of it. Like that was just sort of me going, well, like Indiana Jones, I want him to have a sort of a in every country he goes to, he should have, on every adventure he gets a new special someone. And so that didn't strike me as too big a deal, but like my editor really loved it. She was like, yeah, this is like romance too. And I was like, well, it's not really a romance. They know from the beginning there's like an expiration date. He's like,
have to be like, there's something sort of fun that you almost give kids permission to do, because so much of the narratives are like, and then our eyes met from across the room. It was true love forever, and we were never parted. And like,
I didn't know.
Spoiler alert, it does not always go down like that.
Yeah, so. I don't love writing those, honestly, but before exactly that reason, I find them like, but in this case, it felt real to me. Like, yeah, you're on your vacation, you're on this adventure, you meet this cute guy, you have some fun, but like, you're going home and he's not. And so like that relationship is different from other relationships. And like, it can feel very passionate and strong and liberating while also still being something that has sort of an expiration date. And that doesn't make it less special. And I think that was really fun to write. And Leo was just fun to write generally. And so was Gabe. So it was just fun to have someone who had like been in this relationship for 2 years, like this good boy relationship essentially, and getting to sort of see what freedom might look like. And that was exciting to write. And it's funny how much people are responding to it, when to me originally it like was just sort of like, yeah, that's a normal part of whatever this is going to be. So,
but it is a normal part of what it's going to be, and sort of portraying that in a playful way, I think is just nice to give. I'm going to compliment you again and give you all of this.
Go for it.
The metaphors, the depth, the lesson.
Keep going.
Go on about me. I thought that it was really, and maybe it's just the amount of time that I spend working with adolescents as well, but it really stood out to me, just the kind of like, it was very low key, the way that it was like, yeah, you know what, like it's okay to maybe experiment and find out who you are. Like not every relationship needs to go into true love, and then there's a little line in the moment afterward where Tennessee is kind of like, okay, that happens, like I'm not like upset with it, he doesn't regret it, he's kind of just parsing, he's sort of thinking about how he felt about it and going back over the experience and reflecting on it, and he just has this kind of line, he's like, we used a protection of course, but was it smart to have moved as quickly as we did? Like, do I feel emotionally okay with the direction that we took? And it was just such a quick, like, we use protection, of course. It wasn't like it's not a sermon, it wasn't a lecture. It was just kind of a line where if a teenage kid read that and was like, oh, we use protection, of course.
Yeah.
Yes. Like it was such there were so many little moments that felt maybe just like fun and playful, but that from my perspective, reading it for how a kid would read that would be like very sort of empowering.
Thank you.
Now, let's talk about the benefits, the pros and cons of a revenge makeout.
I mean, that was fun to write. And I love Gabe, and I was sad that Gabe wasn't in this one as much as he could be, but he is in the second one a lot more, at least in the current draft. So I think we'll be seeing a lot more.
Don't let anybody edit him out.
I'll do my best.
What is Tennessee Russo listening to right now?
I mean, ABBA. He's listening to ABBA. ABBA's very important in this book.
Is there like on the hierarchy of ABBA songs, like what's the like, how is Tenny like pumping himself up?
Okay, well, Super Trooper obviously
Okay.
important in the book,
Mhm.
and because of that will probably be forever important to 10 going forward.
Mhm.
Certainly have like pump up associations, I think. That'll be an adrenaline song for him.
Classic
But
song that brings you back to a moment. You're like, oh, remember that summer?
yeah, remember that death trap. Yeah, so, but other than that, I don't know if he has any, I mean, definitely Angel Eyes, definitely, gimme. Yeah, no, I think all the classics, all the classics. I don't know if 10 is like really passionate about a deep cut of ABBA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the deep cut. I don't even want to think about what that would look like. I'm also thinking about Emmett and Tennessee and how would they get along? You have two protagonists in young adult novels this year. They're wildly different from each other.
They both have bad dads named Henry.
And says a lot.
I mean, both of them take the name Henry from different sources. But yeah, no, what's great about 10 is he is passionate and like, he's analytical and figures out what he wants. He looks at options and like he's very kind and relatable. And Emmett is the worst person you will ever meet. And I love him to death.
Irredeemable.
I think redeemable, but like genuinely like so condescending. Like when I talk about like Emmett being the worst, like I mean it. Like and that was the whole reason I wrote it. Like I kept thinking about that Jane Austen quote when she was writing Emma about how she was going to write a character no one loved but her, and I was like, I want to do that. So I'm just going to use the skeleton she set up, and then I'm going to write my own version of someone that no one will like but me. And like I love him so much.
I love him, he's awful. When does Emmett come out? November. Mark your calendars. So my last and most important question this evening, which is particularly germane given to the crowd that we have assembled before us. How's Lulu?
Lulu's good.
Lulu's good. For those of you who don't know, Lulu is Lev's cat.
Yeah, you can watch her on Instagram. But
Very
yeah,
popular.
she definitely saw us packing bags for the long weekend and was like, what the hell is this?
What is her? So some cats have kind of a like they do sort of a like sitting strike situation where they just climb into the luggage and then remain there. Like what's her?
She stood right by the luggage and she made eye contact with me and then she looked at the bag and then she looked back at me and it was absolutely a what the hell is.
Wow.
And then she got on her little sofa. She's got a little like scratch sofa and she sat there and watched us leave.
That's that's rough stuff. It's you have your harshest critic.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
She's fluffy and adorable.
She is fluffy and adorable, and someone is checking in on her. So fine.
For anyone who would like to see pictures of Lulu, we have a small slideshow that we've created for.
We can just log into the live feed.
Yeah, no, we should. We absolutely should. We'll show you what Lulu's doing at this very moment. So I think now we can open it up to some questions from the audience. If anybody has any burning questions you have regarding this book or any other sorrow here.
Two questions. One is, now that you've used Tennessee as a first name, the next book will be Connecticut.
No, I don't know if I could get away with Connecticut. Tennessee, I mean, I knew I wanted another state name and I knew I couldn't get away with it being like the dog's nickname or something like that. That resulted in him just being called Tennessee. So I went with one that is actually a name that I could attribute. And so like the explanation is his mother's a big Tennessee Williams fan. That's the explanation. And that suits her character and like says so much about her character. So it worked out, but I don't know if I can get away with any other.
You'd be the first one in literature. So my second question was, a lot of writers will say that they write for themselves, and if others like it, fine. But you have a different mission in mind, it seems to me, from what you described. And I'm just wondering, how do you keep your sort of antenna tuned to the way, a young adult, it's like a typical reader that you're aiming for, will receive the messages that you're writing, and are they gonna, I mean, because you seem to sort of know very well how they.
Well, thank you. I don't know if that's true, but thank you.
Go with that.
I think that with teens, I am writing for myself. I'm writing for a teenage version of myself. So that's definitely part of how I'm like tuning in. But in terms of sort of like tuning into contemporary slang or trends or anything like that, I do not do that. Because the amount of time it takes to write a book and then publish a book, it'll be over by then. And the issue with teens and even writing for teens is you don't necessarily get to keep your audience, because they will be, you're writing for 16-year-olds now, they're going to be in college when your next book comes out. They're not going to necessarily want to read young adults anymore. Although many adults do read. More than half of young adult books are read by adults. But I think that the thing that I keep in mind when I am thinking about young adults and writing for them, and like what I am trying to sort of how I make it relatable, is I think about what it was like to be a teenager and just the intensity with you feel things as a teenager, and the sort of the way they see the world. And again, making sweeping generalizations that don't always hold true. But as a teenager, things are more intense and things feel more concrete or not, if that makes sense. Things feel either like you are certain of something or you are completely uncertain of something. There isn't really a sort of, I think as adults, we get very good at wading through the complications of life. Whereas with teenagers, the things that feel true to them feel simpler. And so when they see complications, they tend to like look for the simplicity in it. And that is how you sort of, you put a teenage view on complicated events, is you look for how a teenager would feel about things. Is this concrete? Would they feel true, and certain about this one thing, or would they feel completely uncertain about it and try to figure it out? And that variation to me is how you really keep that teenage mindset in mind. Yeah.
Well, as you might suspect, I'm really very much interested in your treatment of the archaeological artifacts. And I wonder if you considered, dealt with, refuted, or did something with the question, really. When you say return them to the people to whom they belong, how do you find any such people?
Yeah, and that's like a really
Let me give one example before I
okay.
We all know that the war in Iraq was a disaster from many points of view. W's war.
Mhm.
And one of those disastrous points of view was that looters plundered the museums in Baghdad, and a great deal of what was left of the cultures of Assyria and Babylon was simply carted off and sold. Then one has to ask, if you found a piece of that, do you return it to the Iraqi government? I mean, current Iraqi government seems to me has nothing whatever to do with ancient Babylon. And maybe it's just as well it's in London or New York.
And that's what a lot of archaeologists, when I spoke to this archaeologist, she said that that's what a lot of people believe. And that's why I think the complexity of archaeology and where these relics belong has to do with finding the people who it belongs to, if you can. Like I said before, are you going to return an artifact of a native peoples to a government that require, like there are many governments in the world that if you find some sort of antiquity, the government immediately owns it. If it is of an oppressed people in that country, do you return it to the government knowing that they may try to hide or erase that artifact because they are oppressing these people? And that's sort of the complicated question. And when it comes to queer artifacts, the rings in question here, the issue that Tennessee has is that these rings are a part of queer history, but it's a part of queer history that people aren't acknowledging.
What is the, maybe I missed this, what is the date on those?
Oh, God, the actual date that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the back.
Hold on.
I mean, are you looking back some of these medieval or ancient?
Oh, no, ancient Greek, yeah.
Ancient Greek?
Yeah.
Oh,
ancient- The Sacred Band of Thebes was, and it'll say in the author's note exactly what years they were hanging around, I think. But
I got
Century
distracted
BC.
as the
Thank
first half
you.
of the
There we
second
go.
was back here. I got distracted for a second.
fourth,
Yeah, I'm back.
did you say fourth century? Fourth century BC.
Okay,
So that, but
That makes sense.
and so these are it's a part of ancient Greek history, absolutely. It's a part of queer history, absolutely. The Greek government requires antiquities found within their borders to immediately be turned over to them. Within like a 1 or 2 week grace period, I think, I don't remember, and not to be taken outside of the country's line. However, if you are to do that with a queer artifact, how will the Greek government in a country that is not necessarily great with queer people respond to this artifact? Will they say this is Greek history and completely erase the queer history? And Tennessee is essentially like, I don't want to give away too much, but that sort of becomes the argument that he has with his father. His father's like, this is why you want to give it to someone who's going to show it off and who's going to be like, yes, this is part of queer history. And if you can make some money off it in the meanwhile, and you can make sure it gets a lot of publicity, then you're showing off all this history. And Tennessee, meanwhile, is like, okay, but I want to make sure that it's celebrated for its queerness, it's celebrated for its Greekness, and it's given to people who like have some connection to it. So how do I make sure of that? And so that is the sort of argument that they have throughout the book. And that is what this archaeologist described to me as the argument within the archaeological field, because in some cases it is simple, in some cases it's very simple. You return something to a country where, like, they are preserving their history, they're doing a great job, maybe at one point they weren't, now they are amazing. But the in other cases it is complicated. And then of course, you say, why not the British Museum? And there's nothing necessarily guaranteeing that in 10 years, someone's not going to loot the British Museum. So it sort of becomes like a question of and the question that this book is asking is, who does queer history belong to? But really it can be applied to sort of any kind of specific history where the line between an artifact and a people's is not as direct as we want it to be. That is a complicated question where luckily I could come up with my own fictional complicated answer. But it is something that they talk about throughout the book, and I think I hopefully captured the nuance of that conversation and the desire to return artifacts to the people they belong to, and also the difficulty and inability to find those people or guarantee that those people keep their history.
Suppose, for example, one were to find buried somewhere in Turkey the wooden horse of Troy. I mean, with DNA samples that show, aha, Greeks used to be here. You going to turn the wooden horse of Troy over to the Turkish government, bearing in mind, of course, that the Turks are recent invaders and occupiers of that territory and have no connection whatever with the Trojan War and really no right to claim anything, except the fact that they have conquered the land on which the city once stood. That was more what I was getting at. It seems to me very difficult to return things to people, the people that they belong to, when almost all of them are completely gone.
I mean, I would agree that it is difficult and complicated.
Yeah.
But I don't, and again, this is what the book sort of gets into. And the answer, if it provides any kind of answer, is that you should essentially try. And what does trying look like? It's going to be different in every single situation. What does it look like to find a solution to where these people are where this artifact belongs? Going to be different in every situation. There is no simple answer, but that doesn't mean you're not sort of trying to figure out where something best belongs.
in terms of where things best belong, you mentioned writing sort of for yourself and writing for yourself as a teenager.
Mhm.
And so that sort of made me think about a two-pronged question. One, if you were to now where you are in your world, we sort of always have these like, oh man, I wish I had known this back when I was 16. What would be your like message in a bottle back in time
Oh,
to
boy.
16-year-old Lev? Like, doesn't it could be fashion choices, you know?
Invest in Apple.
In this, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I was out in high school, and you know, I can deal with the terrible fashion decisions I made, you know. I'm fine with all
Stand
that.
by me.
Yeah, I'm,
They're back in fashion now, so like.
Oh no, that wasn't me. But I had a trench coat. Oh man.
Hey, I love
Every
trench
day.
coats.
But yeah, no, I don't know. I think the message I would send back to myself is something to the effect of like, you're not better than the other queer people just because you act, well, not straighter, but just because you like act in a way that you think isn't as much of a stereotype. And I think that was something I was really sort of dealing with a lot in high school. But I kind of wrote a book about that already.
Yeah.
That-
Interesting. I mean, that comes out here again too with
Yeah.
the good upstanding queers and kind of your commentary on that. And my second prong is thinking about, this is a lot of a book about the queer past, thinking about the queer present and the queer future. For kids that are coming of age now in, I'm not going to use the phrase uncertain times, but times, interesting times. For kids that are coming of age now, kids that might maybe watch this later on, what sort of advice would you give them
Oh, boy.
about like, if they wanted to, because you know, Tennessee kind of is out to take a stand. Like if they're interested in taking a stand, what do you think?
I think that one of the reasons I'm so interested in queer history is the fact that, you know, queer people are almost always born to straight people. And so we don't get to be handed down our history in the way that we are handed down other histories. And especially today, you know, queer history is seldom taught and they're trying to teach it less in lots of places. And I think that is a way of making us feel more alone and more like we don't have, you know, a community and a history to look back on and empower us. And so what I would say to teenagers today is, you know, the stuff that they're trying to bury will probably emerge again. And, you know, you are not, you know, if you find your history, you will realize that you are not the first to go through what you're going through. And that other people have survived it. And that they can tell you more about how to survive it. And that you are part of something much greater than you ever even thought of. Yeah.
It's a good message.
Yeah.
I like it. Any other questions? Well, ladies and men and non-binary friends, we have some signing going on downstairs. We have copies of Lion's Legacy. If you don't yet have a copy of Lavender House, I cannot recommend it highly enough. So pick up one of those. Lev is again going to be signing downstairs if you are interested in that. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Lev.